All right. I hope you brought sleeping bags. I only have about 150 slides to go through, but they're very visual. Hopefully, they'll invoke old memories, and there's gonna be a lot of gasps. When you're gonna say, "Oh my God, I remember that pub," or "That used to be there," and "That was my local." And hopefully, you're gonna see a lot of interesting things. And it's all gonna be through the prism of this amazing book, Back to the Local. How many of you have this book? How many of you will have it by the end of today? Good. I think hopefully there's enough copies because it's amazing. As you're going to see, if you love pubs in general and you're also a bit curious about what pubs used to be like, for me, this book really provides a great first-hand account. And as someone that has been researching pubs quite obsessively, as in addition to my usual Stoke Newington history obsession, it really provided a lot of interesting insight and perspective that I look forward to sharing with you this evening. After this talk, we're going to answer a very basic question that people have been asking for generations on generations. How come pubs have 4 or 5 doors, but only one of them is in use? All right, and some of them are blocked, and you end up sort of trying to figure out which one is open, because we're going to see, and that's one of the main themes of the book, is that pubs used to be subdivided into hierarchy and kind of small compartments based on gender and social class. So each one of those doors actually led to a specific room in the pub that was subdivided. So you had the saloon bar, the private bar, the off license, the public bar. Most of those doors now are not in use and they're closed, and there's always that very awkward moment where you're trying to open one and your friends are saying the next one, the next one. So that's the reason why. And now I started looking into pub history as part of, I guess, local history, because you start looking at our local pubs and their architecture and the way they were designed and the interior. So you start collecting books about pub history. And they're really great. These are just some of the books I have. But this book for me is special, Back to the Local, because a lot of the other books that you have in this list, and I recommend them as well, but they're almost like reference books. They're like textbooks. A lot of photos, a lot of almost sort of academic descriptions of the types of pubs and how pubs evolved from taverns and coaching inns and so on and so on. But this book is very much a love letter, if you like. It's a personal account about his experiences practically going to every pub in London in 1949, and I think throughout his life. And just documenting in writing what he saw in the saloon, in the public, the barmaids, the regulars, the drunks, the games that were played in the pub. And I was so interested in reading it. And to be fair, it's very thin. You can read it over a few pints anyway. The author did not visit Stoke Newington, believe that. It didn't go to the Red Lion or the Rose and Crown or the Shakespeare and so on, but pretty much a lot of other pubs in central London. So you have a lovely map and you have the address. So if you want to go on a pub crawl following the book, you definitely can, which is a great resource. In terms of what does the book actually contain, as I said, most of the chapters are only kind of 1 or 2 pages long, and he talks about, the regulars, the barmaids, the saloon lounge, the saloon bar, the public bar, the jug and bottles, al fresco, the Muse pub, the wine house, the West End, and you get kind of the Riverside pub. So really just giving you a bit of an insight into the different types of people that went to pubs, the different types of pubs. Quite critical at times about what he saw. And I think what's interesting when you read the book, and I just got a few quotes to share with you, is that on one hand, some things just feel like, yeah, that was a long, long time ago. But when you read him kind of complaining about the prices of beer, when you read him saying about pubs closing, you realize that some things never change. Maurice Gorham, I won't go through his full bio, but I'll make the slides available online if you want to have a look, or you can just Google it. He was an Irish journalist and broadcasting executive, and he loved pubs. It really kind of a place that you can see as part of his work in journalism and broadcasting. Some of those pubs in kind of Fleet Street and a lot of that kind of central London area were regular sort of hangouts. It's called Back to the Local, but I think he could have named it Back to the Locals, because you get the impression that he had quite a few around. And the book is also featuring a lovely, lovely set of illustrations by Edward Ardizoni. He's a very famous illustrator, painter. He was a war artist as well. I'm sure that when I show you the next slide that has just a few of his illustrations, you'll recognize some of them from children's books. Very well known. So this is just a very, very small collection of his illustrations overall. from various books, and he's got a blue plaque in Maida Vale. But what I love about this book is that you've got, on one hand, you've got the written description, but when we're going to talk about things like how pubs used to be partitioned, and there's not that many photos that show you that, I was really happy to see that there's all these beautiful illustrations in the book that really capture exactly what the interior used to look like in some of those pubs. So this is a great resource as far as the pubs back in the 40s. I'm not going to obviously read the whole book because you're going to do it this evening. But I just got a few little snippets just to get you into kind of the mood and give you a sense of what the book is about. And I've got some of the illustrations. And this talk is really going to be focusing about some of the themes in the book, but most of the examples are going to be Stoke Newington pubs, past and present, that you'll recognize. All right. I don't really know a lot of the pubs that he described, and I thought that just contextualizing it and making it back to the local. So he says, since the war ended, a lot of people have been trying to revive the habits they most enjoyed before 1939. And one of the most widespread of these habits is visiting the local. The pleasure that this habit affords is not perhaps lofty, but it is very profound and is dearly prized by Londoners who have a pub in every street, as by country dwellers who may have only one within miles. All the pubs I have ever used have one thing in common. Each one is somebody's local. Each one has its regular customers who use it for some reason, in preference to other pubs. It may be the nearest to where they live or work, but it may not. Now, I guess if I kind of asked you around here, do you have a local? Do you have a pub that is your favorite? I'm sure most of you will say yes. It might be the Shakespeare because you live next door, or because you just love that more cozy, old-fashioned atmosphere. You might just know the staff at the Coach and Horses, or maybe you used to go in the 80s to the Red Lion, and there's a lot of nostalgia and sentimentality about going there. Or maybe you just love the beer and the fireplace and the Rose and Crown. There's many reasons. And like he says as well, based on where you live. So I guess some of us that have lived in Stoke Newington for a while now, if you moved around, I mean, I used to go to the Red Lion, then I moved to the Common, so it was the Coach and Horses. Now I'm further down, so it's the Shakespeare and Army and Navy. So you really kind of realize that there's a new pub to explore, and luckily there's still a few pubs left that you can call them and kind of make them your new local. The pubgoer's map of London was shrinking steadily long before the bombing began. If you find a really modest pub, old-fashioned, unaffected, small, where you are given a welcome and can quickly get served, you may be almost sure that it is slated for demolition, though it may have been retrieved by the war. So losing pubs, and that's a theme that goes way back. Even these days, it's quite sad when you open the news and you get kind of the stats about, 2 pubs close a week, and for various reasons, cost of living, inflation, business rates, COVID, you name it. But you can see that every generation was always commenting, I guess, on the loss of that social institution, of that place in the community and the neighborhood that for many years people always appreciated. The great subject of the vanishing of pubs deserves a special word, and it is one of which I must admit that the sentimental pub goers like Ardizoni and myself is often opposed to all the interests, brewer, bench, publican, and sometimes staff. All these people, for their different reasons, would rather have one modern pub, did someone say gastro, than 3 old-fashioned ones. We, on the other hand, would, as a general rule, trade one modern pub for one old-fashioned one, let alone 3. Okay, so even today, there's always that theme, they gastrified the Jolly Butchers, used to be the Flying Bottle, now I don't recognize any of the beers, and so on. Yes, even in 1949, people complained about the modern pub, which makes you think, what? What was the old-fashioned pub like? But yeah, I think that's kind of interesting to realize that it's a running theme. The licensing justices often seem not to like pubs at all. The fewer the better is their motto. And though you can never get leave to open a new pub in an old area, it is very easy to get leave to close one down. So licensing was always an issue. Licensing rules changed. In those days, it was the magistrates that would issue the license. And if you think about a street that would have 5 pubs, like Howard Road, further down, you used to have 5 pubs. Right? Some people obviously didn't like it. It did cause some issues. Social reformers, the police, and others wanted to, if you like, sort of reduce the number of establishments where men can go and get pissed, basically. All right. So getting a license was not that easy, and that's another reason, by the way, why the interwar pub design, which I actually talked about in my red line talk, tried to design pubs in a more respectable way, making them less lavish, more welcoming to families and women, as a way of trying to show the magistrates that it's actually not a bad place, you know. People come here, they can have a meal, they can have a nice drink, you don't need to worry. As for prices, you see, that is a subject on which it is impossible to write. It was fairly easy 10 years ago. In those days, I used to have little sympathy with older drinkers who were always remembering that whiskey once cost 3 and 6 pence a bottle and beer was 2 pence a pint, which I think, if you discount other factors, is about 37 pence. But clearly, it's a bit more expensive than that today. But even in 1949, we can see that pricing was an issue. This book does not claim to be a history any more than it is a sociological survey. Ardizzone and I have followed our own fancy and recalled the things that we ourselves enjoyed. We can only ask other pubgoers to overlook transgressions, make exceptions for their own locals wherever we are wrong, whenever we are wrong, and take the book as a modest tribute to all locals where we have had so many pleasant times. Right? And like I said, it's not a textbook. It's just a personal observation and a lot of interesting insights. So that's just to kind of kick things off and get you into the back to the local mood. Now let's talk about our locality, Stoke Newington pubs. We talked about, or we saw that there was an observation about disappearing pubs. This is my analysis of the number of pubs in Stoke Newington over the decades. And you can see that at the very peak, in kind of the 1900s to the 1920s and 30s, there were 35 pubs, again, within the boundaries of the former borough of Stoke Newington. Today, we only have 18. Okay, and we're going to see which ones closed and why that happened in some cases. These are all the present pubs that we have. Okay, so you've got the Bebop in Green Lanes, you've got the Brownswood, the Finsbury Park Tavern, which is north of Manor House, because the old bar used to go all the way up to Manor House. So these are the pubs. You can see where they opened. This is kind of 1830s, and that's present day. As the population and the area evolved from a small rural village, people wanted a drink. In most cases, it was actually better for you than water, right? Even kind of just weak ale. But all the ones that we lost are these. So it's quite a long list. You can see that some of them were demolished and some of them were just converted to residential property. And you can see when that decline really took hold. So I would say usually kind of the 1980s and 90s, that's when a lot of those pubs either got demolished and a new kind of housing development took their place, or they just became converted and became flats. Various reasons for that. I won't go into those now. That's a different talk. But breweries, in many cases, were very happy to just cash in on the property. They had a big stock of pubs, and it's property. You know, if they wanted to raise money, I mean, Wetherspoons, just in recent years as well, they've been offloading pubs. It's nothing new, but you can see there's a very long list. On my website, there's a walk that I wrote which takes you through all the 22 former pubs in Stoke Newington. So on a nice weekend, you can it's the driest pub crawl ever, but you can go and you kind of follow the trail and you can see where all those pubs used to be. This is just putting those past ghost pubs on the map, so you just get a sense within those boundaries. And it's no surprise that almost all the pubs were south of Church Street at the very bottom. So you can see Howard Road well represented with its 5 pubs. The main reason for that, by the way, was because almost all the land north of Church Street was owned by the church. And they're very particular about the kind of residents that they wanted to attract into their developments. They instructed the builders to build big houses on big wide roads for the middle and upper middle class residents, whereas the land south of Church Street was divided between private owners, and they just wanted to cram as many houses as they could. And the area, compared to the very leafy streets north of Church Street and Manor Road, was more industrial, a lot of pubs, a lot of commerce, a lot of workshops. And that's why you've got this division between the very leafy suburban Stoke Newington. If you think about sort of Heathland Road and sort of Bathune and sort of Fairholt Road, suburban, you're not going to get a pub anywhere pretty much. But Church Street, you go down to Neville Road, Allen Road, and so on, a lot of pubs, and there used to be way more. Just to show you some of them, so this was the Freemasons Tavern in 61 Howard Road on the corner of Milton Grove. Today there's an allotment there. Same road, the Howard Arms, just on the corner of Howard Road and Spencer Grove. That was demolished to make way for modern housing. And you think about the local and the role that these pubs played in people's lives. In the book as well, Maurice Gorham talks about what happened to those pubs that were bombed and how people kind of lost that focal point in their kind of family life, their communal life, and so on. This building actually still stands. It's the only pub out of the 5 pubs in Howard Road that is still in place. This was the Eber Arms, had a few other names as well. So that was converted. Next time you're around, have a look at the white paint because it's now flaking and you can actually see the lovely tiles underneath. I'm very tempted one evening just to go and just scrape it all off. Don't know why. Yeah, let's do it. I'll tell you what, a few more of these after this thing. We're going to go down to Howard Road and get rid of the white paint. This is the Neville, still there, at 31 Neville Road. Further down, you had the Allen Arms at 8 Allen Road, next to Butterfield Green. They should have at least kind of kept the name, just as a little remnant. If you go further down this way, just before the police station, used to have the Victoria, where Tesco is today. And as I mentioned, the borough used to go and extend all the way north, even north of Manor House. And the Manor House pub is still there. Okay, very imposing. It was rebuilt. There was an original pub there from the 1830s, but when the tube station opened, they had to demolish. And the tube station was actually named after the pub. Yeah, and that's why you got Angel, named after the Angel pub, Elephant and Castle, after the Elephant and Castle pub, and so on. So sometimes tube stations adopted the name of the nearest pub. Another one is the Woodman. This is just opposite the Army Navy. So when you come out of the Army Navy, you've got the junction of Wordsworth Road and Bowling Road. So you had the Woodman, and now it's, like I said, residential. Not far from there was the Arundel Arms in Bowling Road. Lovely Truman's interwar pub designed by Arthur Edward Sewell, who also designed the Army Navy, the Red Lion, the Rose and Crown, and about 50 other pubs for Truman Brewery. And that was demolished. All right, so these are just a few of the kind of the pubs that we lost over the years, and I'm sure that some of you look at it now and think, would have been so handy if I had that pub on that corner. So one of the main themes in the book, which is really fascinating to me, was the multi-room pub. Because today you go to a pub, it's open plan, it's one room, you can choose where you want to sit, you go around the counter. But back in the day, as we're going to see, pubs were subdivided and they reflected a very strict social hierarchy. And you wouldn't just go to any room in that pub. A little kind of quote about this one in the book. With their instinct for social distinction, their morbid passion for what American called self-stratification, the English have divided their pubs into the greatest possible number of compartments. A London pub can have a saloon lounge, saloon bar, private bar, public bar, jug and bottle, and ladies' bar, to say nothing of such refinements as wine bar, lunch bars, buffet bar, and dives. So we're going to see that pubs as a public house really evolved from just people's private houses. We had different rooms. There's a kitchen, there's the parlor, there's the sitting room, there's the morning room. And depending on who you would invite to come and have a drink, If it's someone that's wearing overalls and dirty boots, you may take them to the kitchen. If it's someone that is nicely dressed and you want to impress, you might take them to the sitting room or the parlor. And that was really the evolution. A good visual that I think really captures this description quite well is this one. So just to try to explain what was the whole idea of having these divisions. I think in modern society, it's quite difficult to imagine that if you looked like John Cleese, you go to the saloon bar, but if you looked like any one of the two Ronnies, to be fair, you probably go to the private or the public bar. Now, just to show you one example, so this is the Rose and Crown. Is this someone's local? Yes, especially in the winter. Yeah, very, very cozy. Grade 2 listed, by the way. Ooh, impressive. Like the Army Navy. They were listed in 2015 because they still retained a lot of the original features. If you stood at this point and you kind of look towards Church Street, like I said, it's an open plan. You can go and sit anywhere. But if you look at the plan of the pub, and this is where you would be standing, where that arrow is, you can see there's actually bifolding doors here. And there's a partition, and there's actually another partition here, and there's another one here. The area with the curved window is labeled private bar. There's another partition, and this is the public bar. And you can see that there's an entrance to the pub from here. There's one from here. There's one here that takes you to this very narrow corridor. And then you've got this door, and you've got this door, and you've got this door as well. Today, if you go to the Rose and Crown now, only one of those doors is in use. What's now the main one used to be for the outdoor department, and there's still a sign above. That was the off license, where you go and you fill a jug, or you just go and buy bottles, right? Because originally the breweries, they could either sell you, they had license to sell you on kind of premises, so on license, or you can just buy it and it's off license. So each of them would have like a little counter, and you just go in. And kids told me sometimes that their first I guess, experience of beer was filling the jug and taking a sip on the way home at the age of 8. But yeah, different times, don't judge. So you can see here where those partitions used to be. And in the book as well, Maurice Gordon talks about how pubs started stripping those partitions, those screens, even back in the 40s. Because as we're going to talk about, in the saloon bar, the drinks were a bit more expensive. Not much, but almost symbolically. And pubs wanted to maximize profits. So they didn't want to have an area in the pub, which was the public bar, where the drinks were a bit cheaper. But also over time, you think about society from the 60s onwards, and the idea that if Richard here was in a bowler hat, he goes to the saloon. But if Steve comes from the factory in a flat cap and overalls, he has to go to the public bar. But those kind of distinctions and those social norms, they disappeared. And pubs just reflected that as well. One of the most fascinating things about the pubs is the way they are carved up by interior partitions into the most unexpected and fantastic shapes. It is often quite startling to look up at the ceiling and realize that all these compartments, varying so widely in their geography and their social significance, are merely sketched on the ground plan of a simple rectangle space. Pull down the partitions, and instead of a complicated series of bars, you would just have a medium-sized room. Right? And that's exactly what the idea was, that once they ripped out those partitions, some pubs still have them, but you just have a room pretty much like this. What we're going to see in the plans is that in most cases, the counter, like here actually, was always in the middle, either as an island or as a horseshoe, because the staff could walk around and serve everyone in all those different rooms. Just to show you some plans, because as one of the things that I collect are plans of pubs, because they give you that insight into how those pubs were subdivided. So this is actually the old Red Line in Church Street. It was pulled down in 1924. A new one was rebuilt on the site because of road widening. And you can see that you've got saloon, you've got private, you've got another private, you've got a public parlor, you've got the bottles here, and each one of them would have its own door that was marked with signage that we're going to see in a few slides as well. This is the pub that was built on that site. So this is, if you like, the new or the rebuilt Red Line. And you can see you had a private bar on this side, you had a saloon bar, there was the public bar here, and this was the tap room, which was even one level below the public bar. It was just a hatch where you get a pint filled. You don't even talk to someone, you just see a hand fetching you the drink. But this is how they were divided. And in the middle, and that's not in use today, you can see the bottles and jug. So the off license was just there, like a little corridor. We just go in. On one side, you've got the laborers playing darts. On the other side, in the saloon or the private, you might have the office workers talking about their day. It's quite amazing to think that on one hand, everyone was welcome as long as you know your place. So today you might walk around and you might pick into a pub and you think, oh, it's a bit rowdy, it's a bit of a boozer. I don't know if I might get a look. I'll go to a different one. Or you might go to a place and it's a bit too posh, it's a bit too gastro. You want something that feels a bit more authentic. Back then, you want, go to the public, spit and sawdust. You want some more refined atmosphere, carpeted flooring, padded seating, and some ferns. You go to the saloon bar just next door. All right, so you can basically enjoy both worlds. This is a plan of the manor house. This is the old manor house that I mentioned. It was quite grand. And you can see there was a bar parlor, there was a private bar, next to it a public bar, another private bar, private bar, and another bar here. And the counter was bang in the middle. And the reason we had all these rooms and all these compartments is because drinking was a much more intimate experience. It was like drinking in your own home. The idea of the pub, it was home away from home. When you go to a pub, I mean, like I said, today it's all very loud. You've got the music, there's a football match, it's quite big. But back then, it was like going and visiting a friend. Each one of these rooms would only have about 2, 3 tables and a few chairs. And you could maybe sometimes still hear the noise from the other compartments, but it felt much more intimate, much more cozy. And we're going to see in the photos of the partitions, it wasn't about creating a claustrophobic interior where you feel like you're in a coffin. It was really finding the right balance between intimacy and coziness, but still feeling that you're in a nice environment. This is the White Hart. All right, you can see there's a sign here saying Saloon Bar. And we've got here the private bar. In the middle, there's again the off license. The public bar is on the side, and this was the saloon bar. So this door is still in use. These ones, not so much. I don't think I've seen them being in use for a long, long time. And the bar, you can see as well, used to extend much closer to the windows. Today, this is the main entrance. This is the Pegasus in Green Lanes, still standing. All right, and you can see again here, it's not that easy to read on that projection, I'm afraid, but you can see again there was, I think this was the private, the public, the saloon was here, and you can see kind of the shape of the counter. So the idea was that, again, the staff can very easily move around and they're not disturbed by the partitions. We're going to see that the partitions would sometimes even have like a small door for the pot boys just to go around and collect all the glasses. This is the Allen Arms. So you can see 3 doors, the saloon, the private bar, and the public bar. And the reason I love these plans is because if you don't have them, if you try and go to your next pub next time, you can see the doors, but it's not always very clear where the partitions used to be. Because sometimes the counter has been demolished and you look at the beams and you try to figure out, okay, so this door, maybe the area was this big and so on. But you've got the plan and it really makes it nice and easy. So quite a big saloon bar, and here was the public bar. And really you see that, like I said, this island in the middle for the staff to serve everyone. These days, when you go and you see a pub, and like I said, there's all these what are called ghost doors. You don't even know, was this the saloon? Was this the private bar? So next time you go past the pub and you see all those doors, I bet you're going to start thinking, I wonder if this was the saloon. I mentioned the White Hart as well. It's got all these doors, but now you know. These are just some photos, hopefully they'll come through, of older pubs, not from Stoke Newington, but just to show you the different marked and labeled entrances. So you can see you have the public, there's the off license, the private, and the saloon is here. And even the style of the signage varies. So the saloon has this one sticking out. This is the Portsmouth Arms. And again, you can see, and I've got a lot of examples of sometimes the name was etched on the door, sometimes it was a sign above, sometimes it was a lovely sort of ironwork. There was a lot of variations. Now, I mentioned about the evolution of these spaces and how they really reflected if you think about the origin of the public house. Today we talk about the pub, we don't always think about the origin and what's the, public house. What does it mean it's a house? and some people refer to a pub as a house. But the origin of it, and this is a lovely illustration, and it really illustrates that evolution of how from almost like a private residence where you would have like the bedroom, the parlor, and the kitchen. If you had a license to sell alcohol, laborers would usually get welcomed into the kitchen. The parlor was the place where you bring kind of the people that were maybe kind of more upper middle class. You take them to the parlor. And then maybe in the kitchen, you start storing some of the drinks. Maybe the wife doesn't like that, but you think, look, it's good for business. And it really shows you that evolution and how the parlor becomes more public because it's no longer just part of your house. And now you've got the cooking here, the taproom bar. There's an actual bar in your kitchen now. A lot of people just dream about that. But that's what happened here. And you can see that now you've got this private parlor. You've got something called a company parlor. And now the kitchen becomes a taproom. Right? So that private house starts morphing and evolving over the centuries into what ultimately became a public house. Because it's literally someone's house, if you think about it, with all these rooms based on that sort of social hierarchy that you go into. And the last, if you think about state of that evolution, you've got this central bar in the middle where the staff can now roam and serve everyone. Now, I mentioned, and Maurice Gordon talks about in the book as well, about all these different compartments and all these names. It's quite astonishing when you look at just the variety of names for these rooms. The most common ones are public bar and saloon bar, but there are many others and many variations. And there's also a north-south divide that in the north, from this resource that I found at least, you've got places like sitting room, newsroom, smoke room, best room, best end, tap room, parlor bar, first class, second class, lounge, parlor, buffet bar, vaults. Down south, you might more likely see things like private bar, lounge bar, public, snug, snuggery, tap room, hotel bar, and so on. Overlap, but also some differences. I mentioned that each of those entrances was clearly marked. So you cannot just pop into the saloon bar and say, oops, I thought this was the public bar. Right? First of all, you can tell straight away because there's a carpet, there's a fern, and everything is padded. But you can see that there's a wide variety, and I just photograph all these when I see them. Even if I see them from a bus, I'll just get off at the next stop. I know it's sad, but just to document that, because you never know, it might get demolished tomorrow or someone will just rip it. So the private bar, this one is in the Rose and Crown. So have a look. And also the Saloon Lounge, that's the Three Crowns right here. They actually used to have one on the corner, public bar, exactly the same, and someone thought it's a good idea to remove it. Go figure. But there's a wide variety, and when I see online, whether it's on different sort of pub groups, it's just fascinating. Like here you've got the smoke room and you've got the commercial room. And it's sometimes almost this academic exercise of trying to figure out, okay, so was that like the public bar and that was like the private? And you can spend a long time trying to figure that out. I actually found some really interesting one-offs examples that show that sometimes the public bar was named based on the locality. So this is the Exmouth Arms in Exmouth Market, and the public bar is actually named Market Bar because this was for the market traders, and you had the saloon bar. So they actually named it based on the fact that it was next to a market. Next to Dalston Kingsland, there's a former pub. I mean, it looks really sad now. It was like a bagel shop that closed after 2 hours and so on. But it also, when you look on old photo, it also had a market bar because it was facing Ridley Road Market. Those are the only two examples of a market bar I've seen. I was really excited, and I do mean excited, when I saw this on Facebook. So this is a pub just between Worthing and Brighton. Okay, so like a seaside pub almost, and they named their public bar Cabin Bar. It's the only example that I've seen of this. So you get a sense that there was a bit of flexibility. You can get a bit creative with the naming. And if you thought that that was appropriate given the locality and the placement of the pub, then yeah, I mean, I don't think the council would come knocking and saying you're violating some regulation. I was intrigued by this one just behind Sadler's Wells Theatre. They've got an opera bar, but they've got this signage above both of the entrances. So I don't know what it meant at some point. I mean, it's the only example of such thing I've ever seen. I don't know if you're expected to order your drink by singing or anything like that, but it's a wonderful example. Credit to them. Just a few other examples. This is the family department, which I think every pub in Stoke Newington should have one. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. No, but think about it. I mean, it was the idea. You know, are you kid friendly? Yes, if you can fit in there. That was the idea. And you have the ladies only. Ooh. But yeah, that was the idea. There was, you know, that segregation was based on social class, but also gender to a large extent. Public bars weren't as welcoming to women, at least at the early days. It did change, and we're going to see a quote that talks about moving between them. This is another example of like a one-off. So you've got the general counter and the private counter. Mm. Again, they just decided to name it that. I haven't seen it anywhere else. This is something, it's so fresh, you can smell the paint. I saw it in Essex Road this morning off the bus, and I went back and took a photo just for you because I was really intrigued and surprised to see that this new incarnation of this pub, so it's called now The Brave, they actually have a saloon bar. And I was like, hold on, what? Is this like going retro or is this like really vintage? What's the deal? I went back and actually popped in and asked them, I saw you have a saloon bar. What's that about? And they kind of explained, oh, you know, we've got like a dining room area, and this is like a small area that's going to be more casual for like drinks and snacks. And I thought, okay, so the opposite of its original meaning. But that's cool because I think if they named this the public bar, I don't think in kind of this day and age it maybe carries the same meaning. I guess saloon sounds a bit hee-haw. I don't know. People kind of interpret it that way. But they did say they're going to put a partition, like a part of a partition. So this is the only example I've ever seen, by the way, of a modern pub that decides to reinstate or revive the name of one of those old compartments. So interesting. I'll definitely go and see what they've done with it. Now, I talked about partitions, and you're going to see some quotes from the book as well. I was always curious to know, what did they look like? Because there's not that many photos of them. And I was always curious to know, I mean, were they completely shielding you from everyone else and you couldn't see who's sitting in the public or who's sitting in the private? The reality, as you can see from this photo, is that it wasn't about, it was almost symbolic in a way. So you can see you've got these guys sitting here, you've got this old lady sitting over there, and this is the partition. So nice kind of glass, a lot of kind of, you can see this in the examples, a lot of it was quite decorative timber work and glass work. But you know, if he really wanted, he could peek and see what's going on there. But there is that screen, there is that divider between them. God forbid they're going to rub shoulders when they order the drink. This is a local pub. This is the Jolly Butchers in 1977. And these are great photos because you can see, look at the partition here. Goes away all the way up to the ceiling, right? So this is the high street, kind of that side. So these are the windows facing the high street. This is the central bar they used to have. But you can see that the partition goes all the way up. Half of it is timber, the rest is glass. This is a view from the other side. So again, this is looking at the high street. And you can see that you go in here, and you've got this screen between the two areas. This is a great view actually taken from the public bar, looking at the saloon bar. So you can see it's almost like a little private little meeting room, little hatch again. This was not for customers to kind of go between. Usually this was more for the staff. There was a special entrance from the street, but you kind of get a sense of how the interior was just so different. When you went in, it was much more cozy. The interesting thing is that the difference between the saloon, the private, and the public bar was not just about, like I mentioned, the interior as far as the carpets, and maybe there was carpeted or better seating because it was the best room in the house. But next time you go to the Red Lion, have a look, and you'll see that the interior also was different in terms of the paneling. So you can see that in the public bar, the paneling was much more simpler, sometimes darker color, because it's probably more likely to get kind of dirty, I guess, with work clothes. But the saloon bar has a slightly more decorative treatment. And you can see exactly where one started and the other one finished. Right? So this is in the Red Lion. And if you go to the Rose and Crown, you can see that the counter as well. The bar has, this was the public bar. The partition used to go bang in the middle. And the private bar, that was somewhere between the public and the saloon in terms of level of refinement. But definitely here you can see that the difference in terms of the clientele, in terms of maybe what you expect to happen to this, where this is less likely to get battered. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned, we've got two listed pubs. One is the Rose and Crown, one is the Army Navy, technically Islington, I know. But it's very, very rare these days to find pubs that have original features because, like a lot of even our own houses, I guess, societies change. People need a bigger kitchen. They want an extension, side return. They want to kind of combine the dining room and the sitting room, whatever. And this is just a quote from one of the books that says that fewer than 4% of existing pub interior retain much historic value. Very, very sad. A lot of these pubs, even I remember in the last 25 years almost, have been refurbished so many times. And you get the new company moving in, stripping everything, repainting, and then it goes again, again, and again. Very difficult to find a pub these days with original partitions, even some of those wooden paneling. Only 39 of London's 5,000 pubs made it to CAMRA's national inventory of historic pub interiors. Very, very few. You can probably cover that in an afternoon. So I talked about partitions. I know you're all dying to see, let's see some partitions. Come on. You build it up, all this excitement. So the same way that I photographed the signage and a lot of other things that I think most of the pub staff find quite disturbing, I also photograph the partitions when I find them. Now, the holy grail of the partition pub, which I recommend you all go at some point in your life, is the Prince Alfred in Maida Vale, grade 2 listed, has 5 original compartments with all the original partitions as well, and they're stunning, right? It even looks really amazing from the outside. I'm going to talk about these little panels in a minute, but this is what we're talking about, right? Again, as I said, you've got the little kind of doors for the pot boys. It was a very decorative feature of the interior. If I tell people today about partitions, they might think about like a plaster wall that you put up with some wallpaper of like bare bricks, right? This was not it. This was definitely part of the interior, Fred, and it also gives you a sense of the size. Really nice. I walked there actually 2.5 hours on a nice day. I did want to have a drink in each one of those compartments. I made it to 2 because the burger was huge. But it was amazing to go in. It's like a museum. I think I took about 50 photos. The staff was getting quite nervous. They thought, I don't know, I'm from like an insurance company or something like that. I had to tell them, no, I'm just documenting partitions, which didn't sound suspicious at all. Just a few other examples because there's so many different styles and types. So this is the castle in Harrow, and you can see its partition style. That's original. This is the Jon Snow, Carnaby. You can see the little entrance there. This is the Windsor Castle in Kensington. So you can see that there wasn't like one standard design for a partition. It really varied based on the interior of the pub, maybe based on budget. If you wanted to make it very flashy, you might have something more decorative, or if it's something that's meant to be more functional. This is a lovely pub, the King's Arms in Waterloo. Highly recommended. It's in a lovely street, and you can see the partition here. And you can tell that, as I said, sometimes they didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. So when you look up, you still get that sort of spatial feeling, I guess, of the whole pub kind of footprint, if you like. But you also enjoy that lovely, cozy atmosphere. This is the King's Head in Tooting Bec. Some pubs, they left the partition, but they got rid of the door so you can walk between those different areas, which is fine. This is on my list, the Angel in Rotherhithe. So a nice riverside pub. Very simple and functional partition. This is the Elgin in Notting Hill. Very fancy. I don't know where this is from, but just to show you another kind of style. Nice touch. Now, sometimes you can just find traces of those screens. So again, they left this, but there's an entrance. You can see this thing sticking out. Another hobby of mine when I go to pubs is to try to find any remnants and any traces where the partitions used to be. So both the Shakespeare and the Red Lion, you can see an infill where the partition used to be going all the way into the counter. The staff was not interested in that fact at all. But now you know, so you can spread the word. Some pubs are restoring their partitions, and some nice examples. So the Samuel Smith Brewery, they're very big on really restoring and very authentic looking replicas of the partitions. So this is the Bowling Tavern that has really, really stunning partitions. I think they spent 1.5 million pounds on the interior. They also did the Princess Louise in Holborn. I think some of it is original, but some of it is definitely a modern replica. You'll be thrilled to know that one of our local pubs also thought, let's create a nice, cozy place and we'll replicate those lovely old compartments that we read about in Back to the Local. Unfortunately, I think that the White Hart's attempt at adding a partition, yeah, I'm not sure about the sash windows and the whole thing. It does look like they were maybe thinking of renting it out to someone. I'm not sure. I like the idea, but I think the execution is a bit poor. They could have used so many other type of designs if they wanted to reinstate and close off a little area. This is what it looks from, yeah. So let's talk a bit about some of those areas, and I'm going to use some of the quotes from the book just to bring them to life. So the Saloon Lounge, like I said, we have a surviving sign in the Three Crowns. So let us start, as is fitting, with the most respectable of all the standard categories, the Saloon Lounge. It caters for a class of people who want something a little better even than the saloon bar. In pubs that have both, the lounge implies sitting at tables, having drinks fetched by waiters, and tipping. The extra expense of tipping accounts for the greater grandeur of the lounge. Right, so the Saloon Lounge was really the top of the top. And you can see that drinks were served. If you wonder what a saloon lounge used to look like, this is the Three Crowns. And this used to be the Saloon Lounge in the Three Crowns. You look at it today and you think, how was this like a really posh, fancy, respectable space? Because it used to look originally, and look at the skylight, like this. This was a saloon lounge, a table for four. I think you need to make bookings. I don't think you can just walk in and order a pint, right? But it gives you a sense, even in a place like Stoke Newington that's not West End standards, it was still very much a respectable area in that time, but just gave you a feeling of what the kind of the best room in the house would get you. But think that two doors down, in the public bar, you've got all the workers from the piano factories, from the clothing factory, just playing darts and dominoes and cards. And next to them, a few gentlemen with a cigar, probably. This is the plan of the Three Crowns, and you can see here, this is the Saloon Lounge. And you can see public bar, private, and then you have another public bar here on the corner. So going to the saloon bar at page 34, the saloon is apt to be discreet. Often everything possible is done, even to the provision of glass shutters in the bar itself, to save the saloon habitué from realizing that he is under the same roof as his social inferiors in the public bar, and to prevent their seeing that he is having one too. For the saloon is more expensive than the public bar. The amount of tax on social superiority varies, but even if it is only a penny on the pint, it is enough to make the saloon the bar for the employers, the officials, the managing class. Okay, so that was the observation. These are just some photos of various kind of saloon bars that I was able to find. So you can see, again, as someone told me once, this is where the governor went. You know, all the staff and all the kind of the workers went next door to the public bar. This is another local pub, one of my favorites, the Shakespeare. And this used to be the saloon bar in the Shakespeare. Now, it wasn't as grand as the Three Crowns, and that was the Saloon Lounge. And this is more of like a backstreet pub, so it wasn't as grand as well. But this used to look in the 1920s like this. You can see they loved their plants. Sometimes it was, like I said, ferns were usually the go-to, but every table nicely kind of treated there. This is actually before the extension that they did with the toilet. So you can see that that's why it looks a bit smaller. Now, if you notice, you see these things, you can see here, and I alluded to it before, just on the counter itself, you've got these small glass panels, right? Because as the author talks about as well, it wasn't just about the screens that separated people in the areas. There were also in the saloon, there was something called the snob screen. The snob screen were actually these rotating little glass panels that you would open to order your drink, see the working class staff serving you, and then you close it. So God forbid you make eye contact either with the working class staff or even worse, the people across in the public bar. All right, so these are snob screens. You might see them in some pubs, even though I read there are only 8 surviving original ones in the country. Only 8. So this is the Prince Alfred that I mentioned. Beautiful snob screens. These were actually in the ladies' bar. So again, making it more discreet, more private. Today you go to a pub, the windows are open, you can wave to people. Pubs used to have frosted glass. You would have curtains. It was a much private affair to have a drink. It wasn't something you would just advertise and let everyone know as well. A few years ago, I came across a lovely collection of old photos that were taken in one of the local pubs, which I'll talk about, but also some other pubs. And there was one photo that I thought was taken in one of the local pubs, which was the Prince Albert, which is long gone. And then someone commented and said, "Oh, I don't think," someone on Facebook commented and said, "Oh, that's not that pub. It was a different one." And she commented on one of the photos, and I thought, how can you be sure? Because she said the woman in that photo is me. So I thought, okay, so I think you got a good idea. And she was lovely. So Linda gave me some really interesting quotes about her experiences in the 60s going into the local pub. And she said, "We went in both the public and saloon bars, mostly saloon, but if my dad wanted to play cards, he went in the public bar, as cards weren't allowed in the saloon. One of my uncles mainly used the public bar as he was a dart player. Women were allowed in both bars in the Albert, but workmen were expected to use the public bar. No scruffy boots or overalls in the saloon. My dad's friend George was a bus driver who was allowed in the saloon because he had a uniform. Can you imagine that today?" So really interesting, again, just to get that personal experience. You think this was the 60s, and you read it now, and it feels like almost like ancient history. It's something that I think some people will really struggle to imagine. This was the Prince Albert that Linda was talking about. It's going to be very difficult for you to recognize it today, because if you go from Neville Road up the estate, this is the same location today. And as I mentioned, the photo of Linda was one of a number of beautiful photos taken by Tony Hall. These are some of the other photos he took in the Albert in the late 60s. This is her dad. And you can see this is the partition, kind of the lovely paneling in the saloon, but where this woman is sitting, it's very similar to what I showed you in the Red Lion. It's just very kind of simple wooden paneling, kind of dark brown. Here it's a bit more fancy. So the saloon bar is comfort, superiority, elegance, and the feeling of doing yourself well. And very pleasant that feeling can be. There are, however, houses here and there that have no saloon bar. So yeah, a bit rough. But there's all those little insights and all these little, observations in the book that I really like. Just a few more to go. So now let's talk about the public bar. So this is page 38. These are just some images of public bars that I found online. They weren't taken any kind of local pub, but just to give you a sense. So if you think about the saloon bar and the kind of the saloon, the lounge that we saw in the Three Crowns, this was definitely a different atmosphere, the most basic, the most utilitarian, if you like. You don't pay for the decoration. You don't pay for the comfortable seating. It's really just the drink. The public bar is the cheapest and most plebeian part of the house. You pay nothing for decoration, so the price of beer is down to rock bottom. In the public bar, you see more ale sold than bitter, and pints are less the exception than the rule. So this is how the author describes the public bar. A few years ago, someone sent me lovely photos of the public bar in the Howard Arms, where he used to go. And he included this lovely note as well, saying, inside the public bar, the toffs used the saloon bar where drinks were dearer. So this is another quote. So social distinctions being what they are in England, the public bar is by no means open to all. There are many public bars where any patron who is too obviously not dressed as a laborer is regarded with distrust. His presence is resented by the patrons as well as by the management on natural grounds that he can afford the saloon bar. So you don't just go for like people watching, okay? You get the look. These are just some examples of public bars. This pub closed. This is the Dr. Johnson. This is not local. Another pub, because like I said, it's quite difficult sometimes to find photos of the interior. Very, very few, unfortunately. So I try and kind of piece together anything that I can. This was the Cook's Ferry Inn in 1928. Quite straightforward and basic. This is from a catalogue, I believe, for a pub in Brighton, the County Oak, and it's quite nice because it shows you the public bar versus the saloon bar. So you kind of almost tell that you can see the difference in terms of the padded seating. You know, you look probably kind of lino flooring in the public bar. You've got carpet in the saloon. So those small touches and small differences. Okay, so overall, this was all about providing you with hopefully a bit of an insight and interest in this great, great book that I think if you're into kind of pub history, if you want to get a glimpse into what was it like going to pubs way, way back, the back to the Local, I think, is a great little book. Like I said, it's not, if you look at it, like I said, you can get it now and still make it before last orders in any of the local pubs to read it. Obviously I'm gonna stick around. I'll take some questions now, but hopefully you found that interesting. So thank you very much.